I'm 51 years old. If you're in your 30s or your 40s, or even your 50s or your 60s, I need you to watch this. Lesson 1, your body will expose what your mind tries to hide. I first started seeing my body break down when I was waking up in the middle of the night, completely covered in sweat, no idea what to do to get back to sleep. No matter what I did, I'll be lying there, trying to breathe, trying to slow down, trying to tell myself everything will be okay. But that voice inside my head would not stop, catastrophizing, telling me how shit life was, telling me what was coming next, and none of it was pretty. It was then that I knew I had to make some serious changes to get myself out of this physical and this mental rut that I was in. And my body was telling me night after night after night. The very first change I made that changed my life was to reach out to a coach, funnily enough. What that allowed me to do was to learn how to regulate my nervous system. And that started with meditation. It started with breath. That was the very first step in a journey for change that completely overhauled my life and took me to where I am now. And the first step is such an important one, and it's not always the most difficult. Lesson 2, you can't outrun a dysregulated nervous system. I knew that reaching out to a coach and meditating were a great first step, but what I really needed to do was to regulate my stress on a day-to-day basis. Because it wasn't just showing up at night time, it was showing up through the day. It was the short temper, it was the lack of intention, it was the lack of ability to focus on one task at a time. And what that led to was complete overkill. When your nervous system's overloaded, all you're going to do is feel completely dysregulated and not be able to concentrate. When you can't concentrate, what that does is it puts you in a state of incoherence. And the key here is to understand that being in a state of incoherence means that our heart rate variability goes through the roof. When our heart rate variability goes into a state of incoherence, that doesn't allow us any time at all to recover. So what we need to do is to learn how to regulate through that, through breath and through connection to the heart space. Lesson 3, the need to perform is the silent addiction of most men. So as I learned how to slow down a little bit, as I learned that I had to regulate this stress, that I needed to get myself into this state of coherence, it was then that I was introduced to this understanding that as men, we are addicted to performance. And it starts when we're young. It starts when we're 7 years old, when we're rewarded for what we do on the sporting field, or what we do in the classroom, or what we do amongst our mates. And that carries on all the way through. And what that means is we end up in relationship with our performance instead of being in relationship with ourselves. And all that means is that we spend our lives trying to do the next thing. And then we get there, we hit the peak, and it just doesn't feel like we thought it would. And then we've got to get to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And it's a constant pursuit that we're never going to win. So from there, how do I shift from seeking performance to actually just being happy with who I am? Well, this is a big discussion because it's a discussion around self-esteem versus self-worth. When we talk about self-esteem is something we seek externally. We look for others to give that to us. And for most men, we have a predisposition to this performance-based self-esteem. What sits on the other side of that is actually learning that internal self-worth is where the real gold is. This is where we're not seeking to be better than anyone else, and we don't live in any contempt of others by beating them or being better than them. And on the flip side, we're not in contempt of ourselves, where we beat ourselves up and we tell ourselves that we're not doing well enough. It's about living in this state where we're really comfortable with who we are and we accept who we are. Lesson 4, you can't think your way out of feelings. The next step for me was to do what was really going on in my life. What was I avoiding and what was I staring into? And the way I started to understand that was by listening to the words in my head. How did I speak to myself? What were the words, what were the images that were driving my life? Because see, when I started to realize that the words and the images that were appearing day to day were actually the key to what drove the emotion. So when we talk about this, if I can change the words and the images in my mind, then maybe I can start to change my emotion. This is how I can then change my feelings. But it goes back to understanding what exactly is it that you're telling yourself on a day-to-day basis. I mean, are you talking to yourself like your best mate? Or are you talking to yourself like you'd speak to nobody else in the universe? And what I realized was the way I spoke to myself was fucking toxic. Lesson 5, presence will repair what performance destroys. So what happens is, when I realized what I was saying to myself and I chose to change that language internally, suddenly my heart regulated at a different level. Suddenly I lived from a state of coherence where my heart rate variability made it easy for me to show up the way I wanted to. Because see, what happens is when we are in a state of coherence, we live in a parasympathetic state that allows us to just be. And when we're calm and when we allow ourselves to be, we show up the way we should in the relationships that are most important to us. When we're not aware of what we tell ourselves, when we're not aware of the space that we're living in, that's when we start slamming doors. That's when we start snapping. That's when we start moving into a space of just being that person that beats himself up. Lesson 6, peace creates more power than pressure ever will. We've all heard of flow state. And flow state for most of us is just something that we think we experienced at some point in our lives. We never really consciously created it. Well, the point here is you can actually create flow state. If you think about those best moments in your life, you weren't thinking your way through it. And generally, when we're thinking about things and really getting it up here, that's when the pressure gets applied. Where do you go when pressure gets applied? Most of us go in here. And when we go in here, that's generally fraught with pretty much disaster. The best solutions, the best moments in our life come when we're in here. So when we come from in here, that's when our true power is exposed. That's when we realize we're not doing the thing because we want to perform. We're not doing the thing out of fear that we're not good enough. We're doing the thing because it means something to us. Lesson 7, you can't outsource your healing or your growth. The sad thing is, for most of us, growth happens after the event. Growth happens when the shit hits the fan, when the business goes belly up, when the wife threatens to leave, when the kids have had enough of being ignored. The interesting part here is you can actually choose to learn. You can choose to grow without the pain. For most of us, we just don't even know how to do that. Unfortunately, for most of us, we don't prioritize growth. We get our happiness from experiences, and that's often enough. We're so fixated on outcomes, which in itself is the experience, that we don't put any focus on growth. But in actual fact, most of our happiness will come from growth, because when we grow, that will create better experiences for us. The third way we get happiness is quite often through contribution. And the more we grow, the more we contribute. So for most blokes, putting growth on the radar and making that their number one priority, personal growth, doesn't really happen. But for the blokes who do, suddenly what happens is they step into calm, they step into flow, they step into doing the things that really light them up, rather than just seeking that performance-based self-esteem that never makes them feel the way they hope to feel. Lesson 8, the man you used to be isn't the man you're becoming. As human beings, we're the ultimate creators. We're forever creating. But it's funny how many times I hear blokes say, "Oh, it's just the way I am. This is the way I am." Well, that's bullshit, because it wasn't always the way you were. No matter what happens, you are going to evolve. And how much time and energy you put into your own evolution and choosing what that evolution looks like, that's what's going to determine the man you're becoming. But no matter what happens, you are going to become a different man in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. The key here is to say, hey, guess what? I'm going to choose to step into the man that I'm going to become, as opposed to saying who I've always been is who I always will be. Because for most of us, that growth that we're seeking, that's where the goal is. Lesson 9, success without peace is just another form of failure. The thing about peace is, what does that really mean to you? For most of us, success is all about outcomes. And an outcome can only be one of two things. It can be a positive outcome, or it can be a negative outcome. Well, that's how you change your definition of success. Success is when you spend time doing the things that light you up. Success is when you continue to grow as a human being and put yourself in the situations and the energy levels that create the outcomes you want to achieve. And success looks like accepting the fact that when you do fail, that's just your opportunity for growth. It's exactly what should have happened, and that's the opportunity you have to then step into, how do I shift my perspective from the world happening to me to the world happening for me? Lesson number 10, the work never ends, but it does get lighter. When I started on this journey, I couldn't meditate for 5 minutes. I thought I would fail at this like I fail with everything else. But the great part about the journey of growth is that as you learn it, it becomes hardwired. If you do the reps and you do the work, the changes become hardwired, and suddenly it doesn't feel so heavy. See, the part of our brain that we call the apprentice, the childlike part of our mind, the ego, it needs to have outcomes. It needs evidence to let us know that this is the way life is. As we build new evidence, as you continue to grow, what happens is the heaviness that can sometimes be associated with doing this work lifts. When you have a system in place where you can spend 20 minutes a day that allows you to make the changes that you need to make from a being perspective to let you step into what you need to do, that is when it gets lighter. And that commitment to your own personal growth is something that should never end. If this story hits home, then maybe it's time for you to stop doing this all on your own. I work with men who've built the life they thought they wanted, but still felt stuck. If that's you, there's a link below in the description. Go ahead and click the link to learn how we can work together.